Hi, I'm Gene Luen Yang, and welcome to a very special DC Daily conversation focusing on Superman as part of the WonderCon at Home 2020 panels. Joining me today is my fellow Superman writer, Brian Michael Bendis.
Very nice to talk to you. I was so excited to do this because we don't know each other. We have never spoken before, and I'm dying to have this conversation with you.
Me too. So I actually sat very close to you a long time ago. So in the mid to late 90s, you used to table, right, in artist alleys.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Right? And you were like 3 or 4 tables down, and I think it was right around the time that you were moving on to Sam and Twitch. I think maybe that was that was when it started, sure. and that was sort of the beginning of you eventually moving into Marvel and DC. Is
Absolutely.
That right? Yeah. And I remember you sitting there, and you were kind of big in our world, in the indie comics world, and I was in my mid 20s back then. So I was talking to other comic book artists in our mid 20s about how you were on your way up.
No, okay. It didn't feel like I was on my way up then. It was weird that anyone was talking that way. And every once in a while someone would say something like that to me. And I'm like, I'm eating ramen noodles. What are you talking about? Like it was very strange.
Well, up is also a relative term when it comes to comics,
up exactly.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I was very excited to talk to you. We, I think, started working on our Superman projects around the same time, if I'm not mistaken, even though you were already doing a new Superman, because I remember our boss talking to me at length about it, and it kind of opened up their eyes about what Superman really means to our world now. And so I was always like very interested in your themes versus my themes applied to this character. So talk to us about how you start, like, how did you even start with Superman versus the Klan? It was even when you heard the announcements of the YA books, it was the one that stood out like, oh, what? It's a very interesting project. So how did it start?
Thanks. Sure. I mean, I had actually come into DC maybe 5 years ago. So you started in 2018, right? Yeah. Is that true? Okay. You came into from Marvel. You came in from one major superhero universe into the other one. So I started working for DC in 2015. I did a little bit of Superman, and then I moved on to New Superman. Superman was actually not my idea. I didn't want to do it. They actually called me up, and they were the ones that suggested it. They meaning DC, like the Superman editorial team at the time.
And they came to you and all they said was,
we want to do a Superman set in China with a Chinese Superman. And I was like, Chinese American? And they're like, nope, Chinese living in China. And I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. I want nothing to do with that. But then I went into the office and I had a series of meetings. One of them was with Jim Lee. That was my first extended conversation with Jim Lee. I was in awe the whole time because I have a giant stack of Jim Lee comics from when I was in high school. And he was like, Superman in China is actually my idea. And I wanted an Asian member of the Superman family. So after he said that, I was like, all right, if it's Jim Lee's idea, I'm gonna have to do this. And it was super fun. It ended up being a ton of fun. Yeah, we did 24 issues, which was like 6 issues longer than I thought it was gonna run.
That's awesome. That's the best.
Yeah. So tell me about you moving universes. How did all of that happen?
Well, about like the entire time I'm at Marvel, someone would reach out every once in a while to see if it was time yet, and it never was. And then it was becoming. It was literally like I was looking around at the end of a new contract, going, "Gee, it feels like I'm doing a lot of." Like I had gotten to the point where I had broken the record for most Spider-Man's ever written and realized nobody cares but me. And
I cared. I cared.
I appreciate that, but genuinely, it was the mountain I was climbing was only a mountain to me, and I had done so. And then there was this, Jim and Dan had come to me a few years ago with an offer a creative offer that was so enticing and involved Legion that it haunted me. It wasn't just like, oh boy, that would have been great. And I was literally, there would be nights where I was thinking about Legion instead of thinking about Spider-Man, and I wasn't writing Legion. So it made me think like, oh, maybe it is time to really make that leap, which might be a terrifying leap, but it wasn't a terrifying leap. It was the best of all the versions it could be. And when I met with Dan, I think he thought I was going to ask for Batman, because everyone comes to DC and asks for Batman on some level, and I didn't. I said, what's going on with Superman? But I'm always wary about even asking questions like that, because it's someone's job. Like, someone is writing Superman and you don't want to cause any ruckus. But it ended up that with Action 1000, they were going to make a editorial change regardless of me or anybody. So that it was good timing, and it was really exciting. And for me, I had this weird Superman experience where I had not been home to Cleveland in many, many years, like 14 years. I hadn't been back to Cleveland. And then this offer was put on my table, and I went back to Cleveland for my brother's wedding. And then I went to the Cleveland Public Library, where I lived in the 90s. And they were putting on a Superman exhibition, a really detailed, like a library, serious exhibition. And it was filled to the rim. And it was really walking into like my old high school, and there was like God telling me what I should be doing next. It was like, it was always like, I hate to, like, it's not to be all about my ego, but you walk in going, should I write Superman? And then Superman, Cleveland, Judaism, and like all the things that all right, I get it, I should write Superman. And it was a very good healing thing for me. I was just coming out of a near-death experience that just happened before I moved to DC. So to run out of that terrifying experience into Clark Kent's arms was a very good healing thing for me. So I got to hit the ground running and take it from there. And also, I personally was left with a bunch of choices and family dynamics that I don't know if I would have gotten to in my writing. Like, I would have never brought Jor-El back to life, but he was there when I got the book. So I got to examine a Superman with a frustrated father situation. And that was very healing for me as well. It was a lot of good pieces being put in front of me. A healthy, happy marriage, yet they still have to like fight for what's theirs. And it was a lot I could relate to.
I really appreciate the way you write Clark Kent and Lois Lane's relationship, where there is still, like, it's a happy marriage, but there's still a bit of mystery and a bit of tension and a bit of like figuring each other out, right?
Well, I also, I think they're a partnership. They're not going anywhere. They're rock solid, and I it's funny, when I was at Marvel, there was always like this reluctance to anyone getting married, because the tendency is to rip the marriage apart and turn it into a marriage story, and like it's gonna, someone's getting murdered if there's a marriage. And and I remember I was like so happily married myself that every time I would be in a meeting and they talk about marriage being a drama killer, I'm like, that's not how I feel about it. I always feel like marriage is like my partnership. It like makes everything elevated and important and not about me. And I said, why wouldn't the heroes be able to have that as well? Like, why couldn't, like Luke and Jessica was like, why can't they just have a happy marriage where the external forces are intense, like life feels like all the time, but the partnership is there all the time? So Lois and Clark had a non-traditional partnership, but as strong as anything, right? It's just there. Like, you don't have to worry about like Clark like cheating on her.
That's not going to be a thing for sure.
So it's like there's even like a line where someone says to Clark, "Oh, you keep an eye on her," and and like they think, "Oh, because you don't trust her," and he doesn't even know what they're talking about. Like, of course I trust her. What? Like, that's not even a question. So so it was fun to like be like inherit after kind of fighting to prove my point on what a healthy marriage can be in the superhero world.
And then you got it.
Ended
Yeah.
a healthy marriage. And then from there, we can just dive into the stress, which is raising your children and raising, which is basically a special needs child. John Kent is a special needs child, right? So which comes with its own dynamic and its own mysteries. And so that's what I focused on. And I know my handling of John Kent is the most controversial thing we do, but those who read the book and those who heard about it kind of get two different feelings from it. So
yeah.
I appreciate that, because right away, it was funny, like when I first came into Superman, right away people were like, oh, he's going to kill Lois and break up Lois and Clark. I'm like, I would never do that. I'm like, literally the most romantic like writer, like Kelly Stu's always goofing on me for all the like kissing and hugging that's going on in my books. So it's funny that I was immediately like, here comes, you know, the Grim Reaper is coming to kill everything in Superman's life, but never happened. Didn't do it.
Yeah. It is still a very happy marriage. I have to say, when I came into the DC universe, it was a different situation. So it was New 52 Superman, and he was dating Wonder Woman, and he didn't really have a real romantic relationship or even history with Lois Lane. And that was one of the things that I was kind of sad about. I guess I can say it now because it's a long time. You know, it's been a long time. But I was always a Lois shipper, you know, and it felt weird to write Superman and Wonder Woman in a relationship. And I don't know if I actually got it right, because that was not the couple that I really believed in. Like I actually wanted Clark and Lois to be together.
It's funny you say that. My daughter literally last night was reading, we just got our DC comps, and it was the Wonder Woman's Greatest Hits. And in there is Wonder Woman and Superman is dating. And my daughter was not having it.
Yeah.
I said, you should go online and
that
yell
was the
at
first couple. That's the first couple in the DC universe is Clark and Lois.
Yeah. So anyway, if I can flip the switch back to you though, from the experience of writing New Superman, where did the Klan book come from?
That Klan, you know, that
Klan storyline. Were they related or unrelated?
They weren't totally related. But that Klan storyline, I just heard about for a really long time. I think I first read about it in that book Freakonomics. I don't know if you've read that. It's
I have, but I found out about it from the Superman encyclopedia or the DC encyclopedia. I then started to unpack how much of the actual continuity of Superman is from the radio show.
It's crazy,
like
right?
A lot of it's
so
an unusual
much.
amount of kryptonite. Like, and it's funny because we live in today where like the audience still wants this stuff to start in the comics before it ventures forward in TV and film, you know. But it's so funny that they like the purity, but it's Superman's purity is all mixed up in multimedia before that word existed. So so all of
it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense because the radio show was coming out at such a faster clip that they really had to develop things much quicker than they did in the comics. So I did read about that storyline in Freakonomics. It intrigued me for two reasons. One, it had this real world effect on Klan membership after that storyline aired. The real Klan experienced this dip in membership, and I just thought, like, for a geek who's my immigrant parents, right? Well, like for immigrant parents, my immigrant parents were always like, "Why are you reading about these superhero comics? They have nothing to do with reality." And I was like, "Dude, this is an example where geek culture actually had an effect on reality, you know, in this really profound way." And then the other thing that really intrigued me was there was this Chinese American family at the center of all of the action. So I've been reading superhero comics, Superman comics specifically, since I was in 5th grade, and I just don't remember seeing that many Chinese Americans in those stories.
And also, I was thinking, and I read this in your in the back matter in Superman versus the Klan, which I really appreciated, by the way. I'm a big back matter nerd, and I couldn't think of another like storyline that had a Chinese family in the center of it from that time period, from anything. Like I really was racking my brain. I thought maybe you'd have a better clarity, but it really seemed very unique in that. Like even racial stories would be about a Black or Mexican family. So, you know, telling a story along those lines. The Chinese story seemed to still be something you didn't see a lot of at all, right?
Yeah.
Am
Yeah,
I
I think
correct?
that's true. I think
Yeah.
that's true. I'm not a, like, I'm definitely not a historian or anything, but I think that's definitely true. Charlie Chan was around back then, but I don't know. He's so two dimensional. I don't know if I'd count him. I just thought the way they wrote the Lee family, that the writer's room approach.
Yeah, I'm talking about the trueness of the Chinese family.
Was very. It was just. I don't think there's another example of something like that. They're so three dimensional, you know.
And my connection to that is, I know what that feels like. It's very rare when you see a Jewish family being represented in mainstream material on any level, positive or negative, like anything, right? And so, and it's something that speaks true. And like even like Uncut Gems starring Adam Sandler it's a shock to see a Jewish crime story, even though there's like, it's such a big part of like the history of our country. And I you know, so I know that feeling like, oh my God, not only is it about Jewish characters, this is very true. Yeah. Like this is a lot of observation was put into the story. Yeah. So I know how rare that is.
So does that play into your approach to Superman at all? Because I personally think of Superman as a fundamentally Jewish character. Like
I do too, and I can't help it, even though I don't I don't mean that he's Jewish, that he's not, but he's become. And but when I was growing up, and my interest was comics, and was so deeply comics, my rabbis or anybody in that part of my world would whisper to me, you know, because I'm from Cleveland, and two Jewish boys from Cleveland created Superman, and that's one of like the three Cleveland hangs its hat on. It's Superman, rock and roll, and you know, some sort of pizza. And so everyone in my life as a child would whisper to me, you know, two little Jewish boys created Superman. And if there was something I needed to hear to get me from where I was to where I was going, it was, well, someone else did this. Like people from Cleveland made this stuff, and then I was living in the shadow of Harvey Pekar as well. So it was like this mixture of like independent comics, the best of independent comics and the best of mainstream comics happened right in my city, right? And so that was the world that, believe it or not, me, Brian K. Vaughan, and Brian Azzarello were all growing up in at the exact same time. So
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, three bald Brian's from Cleveland. And then when I was in college, I was going to the Cleveland Institute of Art, and I would check the job board every day. I'd just take any job. It was anything I thought I could even vaguely attempt. I would try to get the job. Any illustration, and it was where I made my most mistakes, but learned the most. And then one day I come in there, they go, artists wanted Superman parade. And I'm, what? And it was there was a big parade and convention for Superman to build what would be the Superman Memorial and Superman Museum in Cleveland. And I got hired to do all the signs on the sides of the parades. And Siegel and Schuster couldn't make it, so Stan Lee was coming instead. So Stan Lee was there, and George Perez was there, and all these celebrities. It was a real big convention for it, and it was like a life-changing weekend for me to be at the Superman convention, which ended up not making. I don't know what happened. All that went away. Like the Superman Museum never happened. A lot of Cleveland, weird stuff happening back in the day. And but yeah, and also I got paid in Jose Luis Garcia Lopez prints. They have these commemorative prints. You can look at them. They have them online. Just write Superman Cleveland. It's like Superman changing into Superman in front of the Terminal Tower in Cleveland. I got paid in those.
You still have those?
I'm sure I have it somewhere. Okay. It was the most cherished thing. I was like, I was very, I'm not saying it to be silly. At the time, I was very happy to be paid in them.
Yeah. How old were you at the time?
I was in college. I'm saying 19 or 20. I was really in over my head. I mean, it was one of those gigs. Remember when you were younger and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah. And it's the first time I met Stan Lee, and it was an insane weekend. It was crazy. And also one of my payments for doing it was I wanted time with George Perez. I wanted like I wanted a portfolio review with George Perez, and they gave it to me, and he came at me like the nice version of Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross. He like told me he told me like real truths that really rattled me. To this day. Like I remember like I was having focus issues. Like I couldn't like finish my pages, and there was the king of rubble and Windows. This is a person that doesn't have any focus issues, and he gave me some real like just like tough love focusing advice that I use today. I actually said it to my kids the other day about like focus is the most important thing. Like if you're not doing that, none of that else matters. It was a crazy
wow
weekend. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wait, have you worked with him since then?
You know, it's funny. As I was walking in the door at Marvel, he was walking out the door, and the last page he did at Marvel was he literally, as a favor to Tom Brevoort, drew the finale sequence Avengers Goodbye special, which was like just before New Avengers started. So the last image of the classic Avengers taking off before my Avengers run was George Perez drew. Right.
Wow.
I also, and I also met him over the years, and it was funny because I did, after I had like won a couple of awards and made a little bit of a name for myself. I guess this would be at the time you guys were talking smack about me at the artist table. It was weird. Like you want to walk up. There was a few people. Walt Simonson was another one. When I was a kid, was very kind to me, deeply, deeply kind to me. That got me on my path. And I wanted to walk up and say, hey, when I was a kid, you were very nice to me, and now I'm the writer of blah, 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 right? And I came up to George Perez and I said, hey, you were very nice to me as a kid, and now I just won this Eisner, and I just want to thank you. And he looked at me and said, you're not a kid. How old am I? Like all I did was make him very old. And he said it right to my face, and I go, it's okay, word that better next time. So, and now when people do it to me, I remember. Oh, that's what I made.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny how that kind of stuff stays with you. I remember meeting Art Adams when I was in my late teens. I remember Jim Lee, of course. I mean, my brother and I, we still talk about meeting Jim Lee at a local convention. So we're from the Bay Area. He's a doctor now. My brother. We're both in our 40s, and we still talk about this. So Jim Lee came and he did a signing. I think it was right before all of his that X-Men reboot with the triptych cover, So he was a really big deal at the time. And at that convention, my brother went to the bathroom and peed next to Jim Lee. And then that was like the highlight of his childhood. He still talks about that, how he got to pee right next to Jim Lee. So it's funny. It's funny how that kind of stuff I think that's why we love comics so much. It really means something. I kind of think that like how now celebrities of in movies and television, they all tweet and they kind of feel really close to you because of that. I feel like it's always been like that in comics. You can 100%. Always get close to the people you admired within the media.
When I was growing up, someone, it might have been Joe Quesada, said this to me. He said it was like the only other medium that has this kind of fan interaction was like country music. Like country music would have conventions and you could reach out to them, and comics was the only one, like basically anybody you can reach out to and they'll reach back. And it just seemed that most subculture has headed that way, which is cool. I do like it. I think it keeps, for me, I think it keeps us honest. It like you're there. The readers are right there. They're going to tell you right away how you did.
Oh, I was going to ask, do you feel like that aspect of comics affects the way you write Superman? Because you actually, one of the things that distinguishes your run, I think, is that you have all of these interactions between Superman and everyday people. Like from the first issue of Man of Steel, you had that.
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of notes down when I did I don't know how you handled it, but when I got the assignment, when I'm like, you went from a fan of Superman to now you're the co-author, right? And having been down that road with Spider-Man and Avengers, the responsibility of it isn't something I needed to learn. I knew that. Okay, now I know this is an enormous responsibility. And then I was getting a lot of local love in Cleveland. Like I even like they sent me like one of the bricks from the Superman house. Like, and it was before I'd even written a word. I felt like Obama getting that Nobel Prize before he did anything. I was like, well, wait to see if you like the script before you give that to me. But the responsibility felt immediately enormous, and I dove in hard, and I looked at thinking about what Miles Morales was really just finding a way to extend the legacy of the character into a modern setting that people, that like that's part of it, right? And when people talk about Superman, they talk about the ideal of Superman more than the character of Superman and what he represents more than who he is. And so like you're like, all right, well, Superman, that's locked in, like who Superman is, right? The greatest superhero. But let's talk about like the kids that don't relate to him or see him as something other, just as an icon. And so I looked at everything that had been done with the character. And again, these encyclopedias I was looking at were really helpful because it was like reading the history of the character. But really it's like reading the stories as if they were like catalog hype, it's just like the premise of the story, and the premise of the stories had a definite, like there was a cycle that was going on with Superman and Lex Luthor over and over again. And more Superman was kind of above it all. And I was like, well, I'm definitely going to make an effort to bring it back down so we can feel Metropolis as a city, right? Like Gotham as a city gets built like every day by like 12 writers, like constantly building and building. Metropolis has had that too, but I think lesser so. There's like there was still a lot of places in Metropolis that were vague or just something to celebrate. And I said, well, let's get in there and let's talk about that. And I wrote my first notion, and this was based on a real life city, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting which one. It might have been Chicago, where they found a great deal of immigrants were heading towards certain cities because of certain things, right? And I thought, well, certainly Metropolis would be that. Like if they knew like the most famous immigrant was like hovering over there, just watching everything, it would be like this huge multicultural wave of people just heading towards Metropolis. Because A, it's safer than Gotham, and there's someone there who gets it. He's watching over us, and that just makes the whole city a more vibrant. I said, so imagine here we are, like this has been going on since Superman showed up. So it's been years, and all the cultures are mixing in this great, awesome way, right? They're like, and that's parts of Metropolis should reflect that. So I wanted to do that, and also, it's very easy to say I say Metropolis. I'm like, yeah, but what is it? Show us what it is, and every generation I think needs to dive in and kind of like show us what Metropolis is, what the Daily Planet is, like to this generation. Yeah, so that was part of it. And also I even made the note, like I saw Superman floating above the buildings. I go, why don't he's just floating above traffic? What if he's down like he's like up here is like he can be down here too, like flying over one. So you'll see, particularly in the since he came out, he's been like hovering right over traffic on purpose, like a note to the artist. Like I think he wants to be closer.
Yeah. I think I feel like that's key to my understanding of Superman too, is that he actually really wants to be a part of Metropolis. He wants to be a part of human society, right?
Yeah.
And especially like to prepare for my original dive into New 52 Superman. I did read a whole bunch of old Superman comics, and I read this Glenn Weldon book called The Unauthorized Biography of Superman, which I thought was really amazing. Gave me a
I haven't read it yet. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. It's great. But in all of that, I was just struck by how like there is this constant like this back and forth between, oh, he's closer to being a man, he's closer to being a god, his powers fluctuate back and forth. But through all of that, I feel like the constant is, even when he's super godlike, he still wants to be with people. He really likes people and he really believes in people. So I do think, I mean, I think that does come through with your stuff, you know, especially in those interactions between him and everyday people in Metropolis.
Well, again, I get that some of it's a bit of a cheat. Like I get the tether of Lois and his family. Mm-hmm. Like he's tethered to his work family and his real family, and his work family is beyond a work family. They've been through they're like war compatriots, right? And they've been through everything together. So that helps keep him grounded. But at the same time, I think it's kind of constantly be re-examined and looked at over and over again. Particularly, you know, the one big difference between Marvel and DC is that these characters are twice as old to the culture, and that means they need more tender love and care. And again, we'll talk about it later. But that's kind of like when I made the bigger choices I made for him coming forward with his identity. Was because of the world we live in now versus the world he was born in. I kind of think that that the DC universe is kind of like the Catholic Church, and the Marvel universe is kind of like the Protestant churches, in that, like, if DC hadn't established all of the rules first, then there would be no rules for the Marvel characters to break. You know, like DC had established like all of the expectations of what a superhero ought to be for Marvel to be like, oh, this is interesting that a superhero is doing his laundry, you know? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So you don't have to worry about Superman doing his laundry, but you do have to think about how is he going to relate to this? Like, how is he going to see everybody? Yeah. So,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Also, I wanted to celebrate how much he loves us. He hears us and he loves us, right? He hears the best in us. And it was funny because, like, immediately my friends and I were talking, some professional comic book people were like going, oh, how does Superman like just not like destroy like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, like, yeah, you shouldn't be writing Superman. But having Superman like only see the good in us or laser focus on it, that's a choice people make every day, to see the good or bad in people. And it's sort of awesome that he just closes his eyes and hears people singing and helping each other. So I couldn't wait.
I agree with that too. I agree with that. That was something that I got to play with in a new Superman. There's this Chinese, this Taoist idea called the bakwa, which is like, it's a shape that's usually expressed as an octagon. And each of the faces of the octagon represents these 8 different facets of reality. So they can be, they can correspond to different landscapes. They can also correspond to different parts of the body. And the crazy thing is, if you go from the first octagon or the first trigram within that octagon shape to the last one, you actually make an S shape. So I use that as a way of talking That's about. Awesome.
How did you find that? How did that come across? Did you stumble across it? Or?
It was because of I Ching. It was because of that you know, Wonder Woman's kung fu master, right? Mm-hmm. So his name is actually taken from a Taoist text, and we wanted to bring him into the story. So I started looking into Taoism, and then that's when I found that.
Awesome.
Right, that's
awesome.
when I found that. But
is that one of those moments you had where you're like, okay,
yeah, I was
I'm definitely doing this.
Yeah, I was like, what the? It felt like one of those things where it was given to you, right? Sometimes you have to like massage things in, but that piece felt like it was given. So in that, I actually make the argument that the gateway to Superman is actually the ear. So it's the same thing that you're saying, right? It's not his strength, it's not his fists, it's not his ability to fly. It's actually his ear. That's what really makes him Superman. That's what makes him compassionate.
Yeah, 100%. He hears all of it, and it's all good. Him, that's amazing. I really, that was one of those questions. I'm like, what, like, I know that, like, for me, like, I have this. I was sitting with Miles for like a long time before I was ready to pull the trigger, and it was only when I got to a certain beat where I went, oh, that's it, I'm doing it. I think like that's the last piece of the puzzle, and it was that the piece that got you for New Superman, or
well, you know, I had started it. I mean, we had maybe put out the first issue or two,
okay,
but I felt like I was still getting my legs underneath me, And when we made the decision to bring this old character from the 1970s, Wonder Woman's kung fu master in, and I started looking into Taoist philosophy, that's when I feel like everything kind of clicked together for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And the response has been like just tremendous, right?
Well, it's been fun. It's been fun. I mean, I feel thankful that like originally we were slated to end at 18, and because of fan support, we were able to go to 24.
That's
so
awesome.
It was great, and they let me do a North Korean Aquaman, which I was not when I put that out. I was like, "There's no way DC's going to say this to this," but they totally did.
That's awesome. It was
really fun. Yeah.
Well, I and I guess the other difference is like for me, there was a lot of Jewish creators. In comics. It can be at sometimes even seen as a Jewish medium, like from its earliest days. So I always had a template for myself, like, oh, as soon as you find out, like a lot of Jewish people were making these books, and there's a lot of Judaism in them that I never felt a disconnect to, but I know that other friends of mine who did not have that found their way into comics a different way, right? So how did you find your way into comics, or was it character first, or?
Yeah, I mean,
like, when did you first see yourself going, oh, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, I make the argument, actually. I think superheroes in particular as a genre is very, very Jewish. I think it's like incredibly Jewish, right? And maybe even like Jewish American. Just this the two identities and wanting to, having to switch from one mode of being to another mode of being. I kind of think that as I'm the children of immigrants, and I kind of think that even the fact that Clark Kent is also called Kal-El, that felt, I mean, there's something very Chinese American about that too, right? That was me. Like I had this American name that I used at school, and my Chinese name, like Kal-El, if you were to write it out in English letters, it would have a hyphen in it. So it just, all of that kind of, I don't think I was conscious of it, but I do think that that's why I was such a big superhero fan when I was a kid.
That's awesome. And when did you decide, when was the choice to like make them? When did you roll up your sleeves and go?
Oh man, that's one of the other aspects that I love about comics. So I bought my first comic in 5th grade. It was a Superman comic. It was DC Comics Presents number 57, starring Superman, the Atomic Knights. And then within a couple weeks, I was already making comics. I had a friend who, my best friend in 5th grade was half Jewish, half Japanese. So we started making comics together. Yeah, I think he was already like this huge comic book nerd, and I think it's just like it was part of both sides of him, right? Like he read superhero comics and he also read manga. It was just comics were all over. Yeah. How about you? When did you know you wanted to do it?
Oh, really early on. I have like a TED talk about it. I was literally sitting in my room in Cleveland, and like as soon as you connect the dots, like, oh, there are these names in the front of the book, in these little boxes, right? And like, oh, how can I get my name in one of those little boxes? Like that was, as soon as you find out that, that's a job. Someone's job is to make people feel how these things are making me feel. I would like that job. How can I do that job? And that was it. I never, there's no second guess. There was no plan B. It was just, I'm going to be in the little boxes. And as soon as you find out, like, oh, people from all over can do this, that was it. I was done. And then I started going to conventions, and I met Walt Simonson at a convention. Had a very profound experience with Walt Simonson. That was, I was ruined after that. Whatever Walt said to me, I was done for. There was no going back. I had a really special weekend where I had met him and I met John Totleben at 2 different shows, and on the same weekend, and that was it. I was done. It was John Totleben just starting Swamp Thing too. Okay. So it was like, yeah. Wow. And I had never seen artwork like that. Yeah. I had never, and also, have you ever seen a John Totleben or any of the Swamp Thing pages in person?
No, never.
They're almost like a painting. There's textures of ink and whiteout and white paint all over them. They're thick to touch. You can actually put your finger on them. I didn't know that. I didn't know comics could be that scary. Everything about it was like a life-changing weekend for me, and I was done. It was so done. It was like when in Almost Famous, when the kid goes to his first concert and that's it, it's over. Yeah, that was me at a show.
Yeah, I remember reading those old Swamp Things too. They were mind blowing. I remember sharing them with my old high school friends, and sort of, I shared them specifically with the friends that didn't believe in comics. You know, like, oh, that's for kids. You show them those old Swamp Thing comics, and
yeah, I was worked, and then like a couple of years later, I was working at a comic store in Cleveland, and the owner of the store was friends and kind of an art dealer of John Pottleben. So then I got to meet him again.
Oh, wow!
Over the course. And then he'd bring in all the artwork, and I get to I literally would touch it all like a lunatic. And I remember like the pixelation of the artwork, the pointillism he was using was so intense, and it was being printed on newsprint. And so I would see the intricacies of the original art, none of which was making the final print of the way it was being printed then. Now you can see them on the absolute editions, and particularly in the black and white reprints of the stuff. But at the time, you couldn't see the work. And I remember saying to John, why are you like diving in? Like, why are you doing so much work that's not being seen? And he was just like, for me. And that was it. I was like, yeah, that's you realize, oh, there's a lot of this is just you doing it for you. Yeah. And then that was a big moment for me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's amazing.
But going back to Superman versus the Klan, I wanted to ask you, so you, and not only there, but also in Dragon Hoops, you end up visiting uncomfortable moments in racial history. I don't know how else to say it, just like iconic, like terrible moments of hatred, of which good things come out of eventually. But knowing what I know, you and your artists are now, if you decide to represent that scene, you're stuck there. You're now living in that moment for a while. Like even though you can read a scene that takes 2 minutes to read, it may have taken a week or 2 weeks to write and draw. So you've been like spending all of your free time in the bad place. And wanted to talk about how you got through that, how you feel about it, or was it cathartic for you?
Yeah, it was. I would say it was hard. It was hard for Superman Smashes the Klan, especially. I read a bunch of books about the Klan. Somebody at the Southern Poverty Law Center sent me a copy of the Koran, which is like the Klan's Bible. Mm-hmm. So I read through that, and for a while on YouTube, I was just watching a lot of white nationalist content, just to kind of get to know. I felt like in order for me to write that book, I had to find whatever humanity was underneath the villains, the
empathy.
So for a couple of weeks, like my YouTube was suggesting all this crazy stuff to me every time I showed up. But in the end, I think I'm glad that it was all in the context of a Superman story, because because I had to approach it from a Superman mindset, I felt like I couldn't fall too far away from hope, because it was just like you have to kind of take on the characteristics of the protagonist that you're writing, right? Even if you don't necessarily match up perfectly. So I don't know if I'm naturally as hopeful as Superman is, but because I had him in my head, it made it easier, I felt like, to approach a lot.
Yeah, that's right. See, I felt this because I did a book called Torso, which was about a real life serial killer, and I spent years with these murders and drawing them and reproducing them. And at that time, I was totally the kind of person that could do that, just spend all day with a dead body and enjoying it. And this was before I had kids and before I was married, so I would dive in. And we are diving back into that material for a TV show. And so I recently, just before this all went down, I had to go revisit all the material with the writer and director. And I remember, and I was thinking, I don't know if I would do this today. I didn't know if I would spend all this time with these dead bodies. And then immediately went right to your work. And then I go, oh, he's spending all this time with these Klansmen that the normal audience wouldn't realize how much time that takes if you're doing it right, which you are, right? And then you went right to Dragon Hoops, which visits a lot of racial tensions through the history of basketball, right? Which I find as just as maddening, because it's I know there's like the Klan was always to me like, well, that's unacceptable, and then there's racism that seems acceptable, right? And then and in Dragon Hoops, so there's a lot of that there, like institutionalized acceptable bullshit versus but it shouldn't be. It should never have been, right? And you're dealing with it. So I know how frustrating that could be, and I wondered how you balanced it.
Yeah, I mean with basketball too, with the Dragon Hoops book, if you look at the long arc of the history of the sport, you see progress, right? And you see hope. And even though things are not perfect, I think that's kind of what I tried to focus on. Like there was a lot of ugly stuff, especially early on, especially in the 30s and 40s within the sport. But as you progress, in part because of the courage of players and coaches and even the fans, it kind of all moves forward. I feel like the same thing is true for superhero comics. As a superhero fan, I like reading old superhero comics, but a lot of that stuff is rough, Like I recently was reading just for fun some old Blackhawk comics. Man, those are rough comics. But but if you look at it as a whole and you look at the progression of the genre, then things feel more hopeful.
If you get a chance, there's a graphic novel called The Fagin the Jew by Will Eisner.
Yeah.
Diana Schutz had me write the intro to it. It's a very lesser known Will Eisner piece, but the piece in itself is about Will looking at another artist's work that had deep racial insensitivities in it, but was a writer who should have known better, and him like looking at that story from the point of view of the racial stereotype to deconstruct it completely, so Will can look at why he was doing material like that in his younger days. Like before he went off to war, he was doing material that he has said publicly on every level, I don't know what the hell that was. Like, I don't know where I was growing up in a world that was allowing that, so I didn't know it was wrong. And then I went to war and came back over, this is wrong, right? And then started looking at other writers' work like that. So I'm deeply fascinated by Will Eisner's journey through this, and looking even at like material that we've done in our lifetime and how it looks even in our short window. So as aware as we are of the world, there's still room to grow. Every day there's room to grow. Every day there's something to learn. It's absolutely fascinating. Which goes back to the original question of, do you like the audience being there? Absolutely. Because everyone's perspective on this is genuinely honest and unique, and I want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no way you can hope for a perfect body of work, right? The most you can hope for is when you look at everything that you've done over a career, is there progress? And you would hope that it'd be yes. Okay, so I have to say, the reason why I'm asking was because that was actually the first storyline that I worked on after I came to DC. It was revealing Superman's identity.
Yes. So I want to talk to you about your journey through that.
So I have to say, I came in at a weird time. I feel like I came into the DC universe at a weird time. And then it also took, like, that was my very first work in monthly superhero comics. So I had to get used to that pace of doing things. And I also think I came in wanting to write like a classic Superman, but that was not the mandate of that particular era of the universe, right?
That was like DCU, right? That was like the...
Yeah, that was the DCU era. And the mandate was actually make big changes to icons. But I actually just wanted to write the icon, which I felt like I finally got to do in Superman Smashes the Klan.
For sure, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. So so I think I can talk about this now because it's been so long. But that was not my idea to reveal his identity. And I feel like after reading Superman 18, I felt like the way you did it was just, I mean, there's just so much, again, it's so much humanity in the way you did it. Particularly a scene where you don't even have any words. It's just him and Perry in an office. I felt like it was so effective, and there was so much breathing room that was given to that moment that it turned out really beautiful. So I wanted to ask you, is it your idea? Like, how did you arrive to?
It was my idea, and I was wary of it because number one, I didn't want to repeat anything I did on Daredevil, which was the other time I had done something like that. A completely different story. Daredevil's life was ripped out from under him, which was the world we were living in back then, which definitely was like people's lives being like upended by social media, or just, you know, truths being revealed that weren't ready yet. And I wanted to explore that. I wanted to have a book that was all about the superhero just completely lost control of his secret identity. And then as we were journeying forth into Superman, and, you know, just living with my kids and their relationship to superheroes, and they don't like I remember, like, I think my son said, "Who's Don Blake?" to me, and I realized, oh, he doesn't even know Thor had a secret identity. Like, he will never, this whole generation will never even know he had a secret identity. And then I really started to think about what they meant, and then there was some wave of, like, you know, anonymous nonsense online where I'm like, yeah, people with secret identities to this generation are not using them for the best. Secret identities are not a heroic trope. They're something else. They're like, why are you hiding? What are you hiding behind? And then at the same time, I mean, even back to like early Jerry Seinfeld material is all about the conceit of Superman and Clark Kent, and how, you know, it's hanging on the lightest of threads, these glasses, right? So I said, like, it just felt like for decades, and maybe you felt it too while you're doing it, that this trope had, maybe this cliche had run its course, had done its job, and that for Superman to really relate to us, he would want to share more of himself, like a lot of people do. We live in a world where a lot of people share with each other so we can understand each other. I would like you to understand me more, so here I am, for real. Or here's the part of me I don't think you get, or I don't think a lot of people understand. And you have a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the world on a lot of different spectrums sharing themselves because they don't think people understand. And it just felt like, boy, who would benefit more from that than Superman, and who would empower more people to be their best self or their most truth self than Superman deciding to do it as well. And so, and I said, so it's not, no one's threatening him. No one's trying to take it from him. He's not jumping in front of it. Just, you know what? I gotta be more honest than I'm being. And everyone talks about truth and justice, and there's a lie in my life. You don't know who I am. So and I knew it had happened before. I knew you had done it, and even done it with John Romita. And I just wanted, I just felt that all of us were headed towards the same goal. Like, all of us, and then maybe, like, if DC was in the mood, we could really pull the trigger and then tell new Superman stories. Because that's always about not the moment of ha-ha, but what do you get next, right? And that was like the lessons I learned at Marvel. It's like, you can blow anything up, you can kill anybody, you can marry anybody. What do you get at? What comes next, right? So I said, before I even mentioned it to anybody at DC, I made a list of what kind of stories could we tell? Like, what would Superman's point of view of the world be? What would people's perception of him be, right? And would be mixed. It would be a mixture, right? And that's exciting to write. And it was literally a list of things I had not seen before. So it was a matter of getting him there emotionally, where he would do it, was the biggest struggle. And we got there. And we'll see what happens. The bummer is, I do know, because it's Superman and the genie been put back in the bottle, people never really believe it's real, or like, how are you going to put the genie back in the bottle? And I'm like, I'm not putting the genie back in the bottle. And I even said to everyone at DC, I don't have an out. Like, I know we could maybe one day get to one like they did on Daredevil, which was 15 years later. But like, for 15 Daredevil's 40-year publishing history, that was his story, and that was cool. And I would like to examine this as many ways and as many places as possible. And with him coming forward, you get new antagonism, he has a new relationship to the FBI. He has a new relationship to the media. He has a new relationship to everything. So does Lois. Lois's life is completely upturned by this. So it's just, we're just at the beginning. It's very interesting to watch people's reaction to it. I don't know if you had the same experience. It was people's emotions about Superman are very pure. And, and anything that involves change is it can be very nerve-wracking, and that I hold that responsibility very dear. Like I think it's like the biggest responsibility we have as sharing these characters is making changes to bring them forward, but still retaining what essentially makes them who they are.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciated your version of events. I think one of the key parts that I found the most emotionally effective was that it was all his choice, right? It was entirely his choice, and it was for very, very Superman-y type motives that he did it. And I think that's sort of what made everything click from 18 on.
Oh, that's cool. I appreciate that, man. And I was jealous of some of the choices you got to make, but then at the same time was like afraid of them, if that makes sense. Like, and also because Johnny had something to do with it, and now I'm dealing with it, and with me and Johnny are doing it. I have to go beyond your visuals to other visuals that I may not have gotten to if not for you, which is what comics are always supposed to be. Right? We're supposed to be standing on each other's shoulders to get to something. So I appreciate that.
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. Right. I appreciate that. That's
a nice way of saying. No, that's a nice way of saying. Oh, did it already. I got to do something better.
No, I appreciate that. I do feel like if you compare my version of that versus Superman Smashes the Klan, I feel like Superman Smashes the Klan is really what I wanted to do with the character, but I actually,
by the way, I couldn't tell the whole time that you can't tell that idea was put on you, which is amazing.
Oh, really?
It feels like it came from your blood. It came from deep inside. Yeah.
I mean, I actually think that the universe itself, like the DC universe itself, is so big, it actually almost has a will of its own. Because like when you go from New 52 to Rebirth, they feel really different. But all the same people are in charge. I mean, in a lot of the books, the creative teams were all the same, right? But it's because the universe itself has gotten so big that it almost has a will and personality of its own. That's
I agree with it. And to bring it on home, what I like the most about it is how no matter what you do to Superman, it's just hopeful. It's just hope. It's just there. And for me particularly, it has been such a gift to just be hugging Superman this entire time we've been stuck in this situation. It's been amazing. No matter what's going on in the real world, I get to hang out with Superman for hours a day if I want. It's kind of amazing.
Maybe that's a good way to end, because anybody can hug Superman during this time. You just go out.
Yes, and by the way, haven't you felt that? Haven't you felt the audience coming towards us?
Yes. Yeah.
Needing Superman.
We need hope.
Right now.
We need hope. And Superman is hope embodied.
Yeah, I got to say that's been really nice to hop online every day and it's just people binge reading and just taking it all in. Yeah. That's what comics were made for.
Yeah. Go find some hope through comics. I want to tell people who read Superman versus the Klan that their next read should be Dragon Hoops, because they're very thematically connected in a way, and they create the same great feeling, and the reality of Dragon Hoops I think will be very empowering to people. I really, really enjoyed it. I got the same feeling out of it than when I read like Cavalier and Clay. There was something where like I remember like turning the page of like chapter 4. I'm like, ooh, it's a real novel. Like we're heading into the like the history of basketball, which I did not know, because like
I made my nerd choices, and that wasn't one of them. So it was a great deal of fun for me to read, and I felt the Superman DNA inside of it. And in your journey as a journalist slash reporter of this material that you had decided to dive into, I just really found I saw the connection.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. No, and I would recommend reading your run of Superman and Action Comics along with Naomi. Like even the very light connection right at the beginning, I found awesome. I thought
the whole Wonder Comics line has a Superman connection that only the readers of the books will know. Like even if characters don't know, they're all Superman like inspired in different ways. Like that happened by accident, and then I leaned into it heavy.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I feel like the hope kind of infuses the entire line.
What is hope? Hope is an idea, but you have to see it. You have to see it find its legs and do something, and that's what we try to do with Wonder Comics. So thanks.
That's right.
All right. They want us to get out of here. If this was supposed to be a panel at WonderCon, they would have kicked us out like 20 minutes ago. So.
They would have. Well, Brian, this was awesome. It was as much fun as I thought it was going to be.
It was. It really was. Thank you for doing this. I hope we get to do it again next year in person.
Yeah, me too. Well, to everyone watching, thank you for joining us, and make sure to watch all the WonderCon at Home 2020 panels on YouTube. We will see you later.